Okay, one of the things people ask a lot, they say, hey, Dr. Rutledge, if the MGB is so good, why is it that there are only a few doctors in the United States doing it? And the answer is we have to talk a little bit about how the surgery is performed, give you a little background on how the gut is set up. The fact that in the 1960s, the father of bariatric surgery used a kind of a loop connection. And the way he placed it, putting it up high in the chest near the esophagus, led to a lot of problems. So that when I started using the loop, everybody remembered the bad experience with the old loop, and they said the MGB is not going to be a good choice. So basically, let's do a quick overview of how the gut works. You chew and swallow. The esophagus doesn't do much but just transport the food. Doesn't really help in digestion. Then all the food drops into the big reservoir, which is your stomach pouch. And the stomach pouch is kind of like a fan in that it can expand. It's designed to expand, so it goes from small to much bigger as you eat. So you can sit down and have a breakfast or a lunch or particularly a big dinner, and you can just pack away a bunch of food. So you can sit down and have an appetizer, and then you can have an entree and two sides and a salad and eat off somebody else's plate. And pretty soon you're kind of sitting there just stuffed up, and then the waitress comes over and goes, dessert? And you go, okay, so the stomach allows us to do that, and then it begins the digestive process, sloshing things around. There's a valve on the top and the bottom that are closed during that process, and the bottom valve, called the pylorus, opens and begins to squirt out little bits of food into the next part of the gut, where fat digestion begins with the enzymes from the pancreas and the bile from the gallbladder. So we can think about the gut as having a purpose in life, just like the other organ systems have a purpose. Our bones keep us upright and protect the brain and give us structure. The skin protects us from the outside, and the gut is part of the digestion process, so we can digest and absorb fat, calories, and carbohydrates, vitamins, minerals, and things like that. In my patients, the people who are overweight, that process is working too well. That gut, that organ system is working too well. So for years, doctors have been trying to modify the gut to help people lose weight. Okay? One of the first therapies was something called the jejunal-ileal bypass. Okay? Bypassed almost all the small intestine, didn't touch the stomach, and those patients lost a lot of weight, but they developed some very severe complications, so that surgery was abandoned. Then they came up with stomach stapling, okay? And that surgery caused less weight loss and a lot of regained weight, so that surgery gradually was abandoned. Then they came up with the gastric bypass, and that's a little tiny stomach, and they brought up a loop of intestine to hook next to the esophagus. And the loop, when it's placed next to the esophagus, is never done in regular general surgery because the bile washes up into the esophagus and people retch up this awful burning detergent that really makes their life miserable. Now the loop is used all the time in general surgery, even today, when it's connected to the bottom of the stomach. And so just 2 articles recently published of cancer patients having their cancer from the bottom of the stomach removed, and they've hooked it up with a loop and they did great. So it's done all the time, but never up high. Well, one of the first gastric bypasses was done by a Dr. Mason, a very famous, very good doctor. He put the loop up high, and very soon after that, people realized, oh no, you can't do that, because the bile runs up here, and so they changed it to what we call the RouxenY connection. Okay? And the RouxenY then was said to be the only way to do the gastric bypass. But the loop had this bad reputation. Now, in 1997, I was doing laparoscopic RouxenY gastric bypasses, and I wasn't crazy about them. I had been doing the open, and I'd been doing the open stomach stapling, and was starting to do laparoscopic, and one night I was on call for general surgery when a drug dealer in Durham, North Carolina, got shot 6 times in the belly with a .357 Magnum. So we took him up to the operating room, we cut out the bottom of his stomach, the tail of his pancreas, the spleen, a couple loops of small bowel, and I hooked him back together, hooking the stomach to a loop of bowel, which we do all the time in general surgery. The next morning, I had a laparoscopic RouxenY gastric bypass scheduled, and I said to myself, why am I doing a RouxenY? Why don't I do the same connection I just did on the trauma patient? And it's made it simpler and easier, and there are a bunch of advantages, and I did, and that patient did great. So I did 64 cases at the University of North Carolina, and then I quit my job, and now we're 13 years later, and the mini gastric bypass was initially viewed as being a version of the old loop. So everybody thought all my patients would suffer from bile reflux. Now, this morning we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 post-op, 7, 8 post-op patients who are about a year out to 2 years, and anybody having bad constant problems with bile reflux. So it was a worry that they had, so now the surgeons in the United States have said, we're frightened of the MGB, we're not going to do it. And so I've kind of continued to do it because I think it's better. And around the world, surgeons are adopting it. So it's pretty exciting. This coming year, the International Federation for Surgery of Obesity is going to have a special 4-hour session on the MGB. There is going to be a special interest group at the International Federation, and surgeons in England, France, Spain, Germany, Austria, Lebanon, Israel, Turkey, India, Australia, Taiwan, China, Hong Kong, and throughout the South America, Central America are doing the MGB. So it's gone from something which people have been very skeptical about to one that now is kind of spreading around the world. But like new things, it had to prove itself because of the problems with the old loop. And some people still refer to it by the old loop, and that's why it's not covered by insurance. The good news for patients around the world that we're excited about is that with the adoption in other countries, we expect more adoption in the United States over the next 2 years, so we expect insurance coverage to improve and lots of other doctors to begin to adopt it. And so that's kind of the background of the MGB. So that drug dealer in North Carolina was the first MGB. He was tall and strong and scary, but really wasn't a good candidate for an MGB. So when he came back from prison at 6 months, he looked a little too thin.
It's like a poster child.
Yeah.